We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Vav Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 106a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the machlokas tanoim in the Mishnah when it comes to the parim hanisrafim. At what point in time do they cause the tumah of the begadim? According to the Rabbanan, the moment that the parim hanisrafim leave one machana, when they leave the azara, so then the kohanim who are dealing with burning the parim hanisrafim and the stirim hanisrafim, that's when their clothing will become tamei. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He says when the fire takes hold of the majority of the parim hanisrafim, the stirim hanisrafim, when the majority is burned, it's at that point in time that the garments of the kohanim who are dealing with this, that those garments become tamei. And the Gemara said in the previous summit that the Rabbanan, they learn their halacha from the pasuk. The pasuk says michutz lamachana. From the michutz lamachana, we understand when it leaves just one machana, when it leaves the azara, it's at that point in time that the tumah is chal, the tumah takes effect. And the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon do with the pasuk of michutz lamachana? And the Gemara says Rabbi Shimon uses michutz lamachana to a comparison. It's essentially a comparison between the par yom kippurim, which is the same as the parim hanisrafim and the stirim hanisrafim. It also is burned outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the three camps. So it's a comparison between that and the Parah Aduma. We learn from Parah Aduma, just like Parah Aduma is done to the east of Yerushalayim, Afkan, so to over here, Lemizracha Shal Yerushalayim, the procedure is to the east of Yerushalayim. And the Gemara continues, Elul Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, Heicha Sarif Lu, where do they say that it's burned? And Rashi explains, V'Rabbanan demafki le lekra l'tumas begadim. Again, the Rabbanan use the pasuk for tumas begadim, for the impurity of the garments. V'les lu gzeira shava. They don't have this gzeira shava of Rabbi Shimon. So Heicha Sarif Lu le'ezu ruach shal Yerushalayim. To what direction from Yerushalayim are the parim hanisrafim? Are they burned? And the Gemara continues and answers Kidatanya, as we learned in the following brisa. Heichon and Nisrafin, where are they burned? Litzafon Yerushalayim, to the north of Yerushalayim, chutz l'shalosh machanos, outside of the three camps. Rashi explains Litzvona shal Yerushalayim shekol ma'aseh chatos b'tzafon. In general, the procedure of a chatos is done in the north. And the brisa continues. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, Abeis Hadesh and Nisrafin, they are burned on the Beis Hadesh, on the place of the ashes. Rashi explains Abeis Hadesh and Tzarich sheyaktim l'sham deshen mizbeach. You have to first put over there the ashes from the mizbeach. Shehei nikra kodem lachein mokom shefach hadesh, and that's why it's in that way it's going to be called the place of the shefach hadeshen mechlal de l'tana kama lo tzarich, and that would imply that this requirement does not apply according to the Tana Kama. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Man Tana de Poligoled Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Who's the Tana that argues on Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Again, the Tana that says there's no such requirement of Beis Hadeshen. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rava says, the Tana, it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Al Shefach Hadeshen Yisar, if it has to be burned on the Shefach Hadeshen, which again means Sheyehei Sham Deshen, that there has to be ashes from the Mizbeach over there. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Sheyehei Mekoma Meshupach. What the pasuk actually means is the place has to be a place that's slanted. The Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya. Abaya said to him, he said to Rava, Dilma b'Mekoma Meshupach Pligi. How do you know that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that there's no requirement for deshen? Maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov agrees there's a requirement for deshen, and the actual machlokas is whether it has to be Mekoma Meshupach. Does it have to be slanted? Maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says it has to be slanted, and the Tana Kama does not have that requirement. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he damar lo ashminan al shefech elashi Mekoma madron she'edashno mishtapich. Again, it has to be that the deshen is going to be mishtapich. It's going to go down. It's on an angle. It's on a slant. And the Gemara then said, V'dilma b'Mekoma Meshupachu de pligi. Maybe they're just arguing about that issue. Umod Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov sheyaktim sham deshen. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov agrees that there has to first be placed deshen, ashes over there. Ela de boy nami Mekoma Meshupach. But he also requires that it be an area where it's going to spill, meaning an area that is slanted. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught on a brisa, Hasoreif metame begadim, the person who's actually burning the bull and the goat, that causes the tumas begadim, that his garments become impure. Velo hamatzis esaor metame begadim, but the person who kindles the fire, his begadim are not tamei. Velo hamisader es hamarocha metame begadim, and also not the person who arranges the wood for the fire, also his begadim do not become tamei. Ve'ezo asorif, and what's considered the soreif, the person who's doing the burning, that means hamisayeya b'shasreif, for the person who's assisting at the time of the actual burning of the he-goat or the bull. Yachol af mishanasu efer mitami begadim. Now one might think that even when it becomes ashes at that point in time, the person who's participating, his begadim will be tamei. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, osam, it says them, osam mitamin begadim, they cause tumas begadim, umishanas and efer, but once it becomes ashes, ein mitamin begadim, then there is no tumas begadim. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, osam mitamin begadim, they cause tumas begadim, but nitach habasar ein mitamin begadim, but once the meat is incinerated, then there is no tumas begadim. And the Gemara says, my beinayu, what's the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon? They seem to be saying the same thing. Amar Rava says, Ika beinayu deshavya charocha. The difference between them is, let's say they're not actually ashes, but let's say it's charred, it's scorched. That is the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi explains, Hasoref hamisasik b'tzarches reifasun kagon hamisayeya b'shas reif, for the person who's dealing with the burning. For example, he's assisting during the time of the burning. V'haitana isleik Rabbi Shimon. Now this Tana holds like Rabbi Shimon. De'ein metamin begadim at sheyutzas bohen ha'or. Again, Rabbi Shimon said there's only tumas begadim when the fire actually takes hold, and that's what the Tana of this brisa is saying as well. The shavya charoch, and the difference between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Shimon is, let's say it's charred, to have a nitach habasar, ve'efer miyah lo have it. That would be a situation where again the meat is incinerated, but it's not yet ashes. And the Tana Kama, according to the Tana Kama, mitamin ad sheyasu efer, it's still going to cause tum until it actually becomes ashes. The osam karinabu, that's still called osam. Avol efer lo mikri, but it's not called efer. Well, Rebbe Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, ein mitamin begadim. According to Rebbe Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, even if it's not yet efer, but if it's already been charred, it's no longer going to cause tumas begadim. According to Rabbi Shimon, hadron aloch tvul yom. We will return to you perak tvul yom. And this is the end of the 12th parak of Meseches Zevachim. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 13th parak of Meseches Zevachim. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, Hashochet v'hamala b'chutz. If somebody slaughters kachim and offers the kachim b'chutz outside of the Beis HaMikdash, chayiv al hashchita v'chayiv al halo. He's chayiv too. He has to bring 2 karbanos in such a situation. He's chayiv for the slaughtering it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and he's also chayiv for offering it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Shachat b'fnim v'hela b'chutz. If the person slaughters it inside, and then he offers it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash, in that situation he's chayiv. However, shachat b'chutz v'hela b'chutz, if he slaughters the kachim outside the Beis HaMikdash and offers it up outside the Beis HaMikdash potter, then he's exempt. Shelo hela elo davar pasel, because there he only offered up something that was already disqualified because he slaughtered it outside the Beis HaMikdash. Amru lo, the Chachamim said to him, they said to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Af hashochet b'fnim, according to your argument, even if somebody slaughters inside, umala b'chutz, and then he offers it up outside, kevon shotzio paslo, once he takes it out of the Beis HaMikdash, isn't that going to disqualify it anyhow? There it's also disqualified, and therefore there should be no distinction between the two cases. And the Mishnah continues, Hatame sha'achal bein kodesh tame bein kodesh tahar. If somebody who's tame, he eats kodesh, whether that kodesh is tame, whether it's tahar, chayiv, so then he's liable. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Tame sha'achal tahar, chayiv, v'tamei sha'achal tamei pater. If he's tamei and he eats kachim that is tar, then he's chayiv. But if he's tamei and he eats kachim that's tamei, then he's pater. Shelo achal ela davar tamei, because he ate something that was already tamei, and so therefore there is no liability. Amrulo, they said to him, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Af tamei sha'achal asatar, even if he's tamei and he eats what is tahar, but kevan shenaga bo, but the moment that he touches it, timo, so then he makes it tamei. So again, it's an identical case, and therefore you should make no distinction between the two cases. And the Mishnah continues, Vitar sha'achal tamei. Now, if he is tar and he eats kachim that are tamei, so then pater, then he's pater, meaning to say that is not a liability of kares in such a situation. She'eno chayiv elo al tumas haguf, because the liability of kares is only by tumas haguf when the individual is tamei. It's not talking about when the kachim is tamei. And Rashi explains, Hashochet kachim b'chutz v'hela b'chutz, one who slaughters kachim outside the Beis HaMikdash and offers it up outside the Beis HaMikdash b'hela echad, and it's all one mistake. Again, this is a situation where if it would be done on purpose, so then the punishment would be kares. If it's done by mistake, the punishment is to bring a karban chatas. In this case, the person would have to bring 2 karbanos for both the shchita and the halah. Chayev al hashchita v'chayev al ha'aliyah. He's chayev on the slaughtering and on the offering up. Shein shnei gufei aver. It's 2 separate averis. The tarvayu ksivi, both are written in the pasuk asher yishachid v'asher yala. It mentions both in the pasuk the slaughtering and the offering up. Shelo hela ela davar pasel. And then Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that if he slaughters it inside the Beis HaMikdash and offers it outside the Mikdash, then he's chayiv. But if he slaughters it outside the Beis HaMikdash and offers it up outside the Beis HaMikdash, he's potter, because what he offered up was something that was pasel, that was disqualified. V'anon miskabel bifnim bo'inon. In order to be liable, the requirement is that it has to be something that would have been accepted inside the Beis HaMikdash. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'al pesach ol moed lo yivenu, that he didn't bring it to the entrance of the Ol Moed. Kevan shautzio paslo, the Rabbanan argued against Rabbi Yossi Aglili that it's disqualified here also. Even if he slaughters it inside the Beis HaMikdash, the moment he brings it out, it's disqualified. Ve'afilu hachi chayiv, and nevertheless he's chayiv. V'huadin l'shochid b'chutz u'mala b'chutz. So the same should be true if it's slaughtered outside and offered up outside. Hatamei sha'achal, and then the Mishnah had a case of a person who's tamei, who eats kodesh. And again, the Chachamim said, the Tanakama said, whether the Kodesh is Tameh or Tahar, he's liable. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that he's only liable if the Kodesh is Tahar. He's not liable if the Kodesh is Tameh. And Rashi says, Mishum the Pligi Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'Rabbanan b'Tarvayu. Since Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the Rabbanan are arguing in both of these cases in the Mishnah, V'damu hanach pluksa lahadadi, and the two arguments are similar to one another. Taninu gabe hadadi. That's why they are taught together in this Mishnah. And again, the Chachamim argued back, the Tanakama argued back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Kevan once he touches it, it's tameh. Nevertheless, when he goes out and eats it, he is chayiv. Umali nitma basar al yado, mali nitma al yadei acherim. What difference does it make if it's tameh through him or through someone else? She'eno chayiv ela al tomas haguf. And then the Mishnah said that one is only liable to kares if the individual is tameh. K'dechsiv tumaso olav v'nichursa, like it's written in the pasuk, the tum is upon him, and there's kares v'darshinan v'perek beis Shammai. We darshan in perek beis Shammai earlier, but tomas haguf hakosam medaver. The pasuk is talking about when the person is tameh, and we understand that because misha tuma porachas mimenu. It's talking about a person who the tuma is porachas mimenu. It can fly off him, so to speak. He can, in theory, purify himself, and so therefore, again, we're talking about tumas haguf. And the Gemara says, B'shlom mahela, I understand if he offers the carbon up outside of the Beis HaMikdash, ksiv onesh u'ksiv asar. It's written in the pasuk, the punishment, and it's written in the pasuk, the warning as well. Onesh, the punishment, ksiv, as it's written, v'al pesach ol moed lo yevienu. It says he doesn't bring it to the entrance of the Ol Moed, and that pasuk goes on to mention the punishment of kares. And azhara, the warning as well, ksiv, as it's written, hishamer lecha pentala olosecha. It says, be careful, maybe you'll offer up your olos again outside of the Beis HaMikdash. That is the pasuk of the warning. V'chiyad yamar Rabbi Avin amar Rabbi Lazar, and this is like what Rabbi Avin said, that Rabbi Lazar said, that kol makom shenemar hishamer pen vial, in any place where it says hishamer pen or al, eino elo losase. It refers to a losase. It's a negative commandment. It says in the pasuk hishamer, and therefore again it is an azhara. It is a warning. So we understand by offering it up outside the Beis HaMikdash, we have a warning and we have a punishment. Ela shchita, but when it comes to shchita, when it comes to slaughtering, b'shalama onesh, I understand the punishment. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, v'al pesach ol moed lo havio. He doesn't bring it to the pesach ol moed, and there again it mentions the punishment. Ela azhara, but when it comes to the warning, minolan, from where do we know that? Amar Kra, the Gemara says it's because the pasuk says v'lo yizbechu od, and the pasuk of v'lo yizbechu od, that's talking about shchita, that's talking about slaughtering outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And we will take a look at the full psukim. Again, the first pasuk, v'aleim tomar yeshishmi Beis Yisrael, umin hager asher yagor besochem asher yale ola ozavach. It's talking about offering up the carbon. V'al pesach ol moed lo yevianu. Again, he doesn't bring it to the entrance of the Ol Moed. Lasos oso lashem v'nichras ha'ishahu me'amav. That's the pasuk of the punishment. It says kares by offering it up. And then the warning pasuk, hishamer lecha pentala olosecha b'chol makom asher tira. Again, hishamer is an azhara. It's a language of warning, and it's talking about offering it up b'chol makom, in any place outside of the proper place. And then the pasuk also says, "Yishish mi Beis Yisrael asher yishchat shor chesev o eiz b'machane o asher yishchat michutz lamachane." Again, talking about slaughtering it outside the camp. V'yal pesach ol moed lo havio lahakriv karban laHashem lefnei mishkan Hashem dam yechoshev l'ishahu dam shafach v'nichras o ishahu mikaravamo. Again, the pasuk mentions kares over here. And finally, the warning for shchita, the pasuk says, "V'lo yizbechu odes as ivcheim la seirim." It says that they should no longer sacrifice to the seirim asher heim zonim achareim chukas olam tiazos lahem ladorosam. And at this point in time in the Gemara is understanding that this pasuk is a warning about slaughtering outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi explains, shchita v'hala, with regards to slaughtering and offering up, beis parshios smucho zulazu. These are two parshios that are near one another, be'acharei mos, in parshas acharei mos. Ela azhara Gemara Minolan, and the Gemara asks, where do we know the warning from? Because there is a liability to bring a chatos in this case. And she'ein chatos bo ela alav v'kares. We know that a chatos is only brought if there's a negative commandment and kares, and so therefore there must be some azhara. That's why the Gemara is searching for an azhara. Keretanana pesach v'amila mitzvahs aseh ve'ein chayoven aleim chatos. As we learned, the pesach, the korban pesach, and bris milah, those are positive commandments. There's no azhara, there's no lav, there's no warning, and therefore there is no chiyuv of a chatos, even though there is kares over there. But Meseches krisus, that's in Meseches krisus. And the Gemara continues and asks, Haimi boy leilech, but isn't this pasuk of v'lo yizbechu od? It's not needed to teach a warning about slaughtering outside the Beis HaMikdash, slaughtering kodshim outside the Beis HaMikdash. It's actually needed for what Rebbe Lazar teaches. The Yamar, because Rebbe Lazar says, Minayin lezoveach behema lemarkulis. From where do we know that if somebody slaughters an animal to the avodah zarah markulis, which is normally served by throwing stones at it, shu chayev, so if he slaughters an animal to markulis, how do we know he's chayev? T'chsiv, because it's written v'lo yizbechu od as Zevachim. That's the pasuk we just quoted. Again, that pasuk says that they shouldn't slaughter lasi'irim, and we're understanding that to mean that if he slaughters the animal lemarkulis to, let's say, an avodah zarah, which is served in a different way, so still the person is liable. If this pasuk can't be talking about serving in the normal fashion that avodah zarah is served, because it's already written eicha yavdu, the way that they serve. So teneu inyan l'shaloch chedarka, apply the pasuk to when it's served not in the normal fashion. If one slaughters an animal to an avodah zarah, even if that's not the normal way of serving that avodah zara, the person is going to be liable. Rashi explains lemarkulis afal pisha avodaso derech bizayin, even though the real way of serving avodah, the real way of serving the avodah zara markulis is to do it in a disgraceful manner. Lesaklo ba'avonim, they would stone it, they would throw stones at it. V'zeh ovdo derech kavod, and this person is serving it in the opposite kind of way. He's serving it in an honorable way. V'lo karina be'echa yavdu, and we can't refer to this as the way it's normally served. V'yasechein v'afilu achim minayin shu chayiv. How do we know nevertheless that he's chayiv? And so again, we learn that from the pasuk of v'lo yizbechu od. So how can we say that v'lo yizbechu od is a source for slaughtering kodshim outside of the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara continues and answers. Amar Rabba says, Kari Bey v'lo yizbechu, v'Kari Bey v'lo od. We read the pasuk v'lo yizbechu, and we read the v'lo od. We read it as two separate warnings that can actually be teaching both. Rashi explains, Kari Bey v'lo yizbechu, v'Kari Bey v'lo od. De'ilech Rebbe Lazar lichto v'lo od as zivcheim lasi'irim. If it was just for Rebbe Lazar, it could just say v'lo od as zivcheim lasi'irim. V'haydech siv v'lo yizbechu, but the fact that it adds in, it's written v'lo yizbechu, la'azhar as shchutei chutz, that's for a warning for slaughtering it outside the mikdash. Also, that's what it's coming for. And how do we know that? The samech li parshasa, because again, it's near that parsha, and therefore we can actually derive both. But the Gemara continues and asks, Akati, still mi boy lechidatanya, isn't it needed for the following, for what's taught in the following brisa? Ad kan hu medaber bekodshim shekdeishon b'shas isra habamos. Until now, the pasuk is speaking about kodshim that were sanctified, that were consecrated at the time when bamos are altars that are outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So it's a time of isra habamos, when you're not allowed to have bamos. That's what the pasuk was speaking about. V'hikrivon b'shas isra habamos. So it was sanctified at the time of Isra Habamos, and it was offered at the time of Isra Habamos. Rashi explains, Ad Kan, it means as follows. Ad HaMikra Hazed Lo Yizbechu. Until this pasuk of Lo Yizbechu, Kol HaInyon HaElyon Shenenash Kares Al Shchutei Chutz Ve'al Halo As Chutz. The entire topic of the parsha that's talking about Kares, when one slaughters kodshim outside the Beis HaMikdash, or one offers kodshim up outside the Beis HaMikdash, that whole parsha was Medaber Bekodshim Shekdeishon B'Shas Isra Habamos. It's talking about kodshim that were consecrated at the time when bamos were not allowed, when a mizbeach outside of the Beis HaMikdash was not allowed, meaning Mishahukam HaMishkan, from the time that the Mishkan was put up. De'ilu hanach tehuk teshu meikara, because those animals which were sanctified, which were consecrated before that time, meaning before the time of the Isra Habamos, ilo marbi lahu kra behedya, if not for the fact that the pasuk has a specific inclusion for that, mistama lo shaminan lahu. So mistama, I would not say to include such a situation in terms of the prohibition, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Vav Amud Beis.